December 1945. A military convoy rolled south on California's newly completed coastal highway, the ocean stretching endlessly to the west, golden hills rising to the east. Inside the canvas-covered trucks sat 43 Japanese prisoners of war, their first glimpse of America beyond the barbed wire of Camp McCoy in Wisconsin. They expected another prison, another compound, perhaps harsher treatment now that the conflict had ended. They could not have imagined what awaited them at journey's end. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What these men would witness during that 3-day journey down the Pacific Coast Highway would shatter every assumption they held about their captors, about America, and about the meaning of victory and defeat. Lieutenant Takeshi Yamamoto sat near the rear of the lead truck, his back pressed against the wooden bench. At 32 years old, he had commanded an infantry company during the operations in the Philippines before his capture in early 1944. For 20 months, he had lived behind wire, first on Luzon, then after transfer to the American mainland. He had learned some English from the guards, enough to understand orders and simple conversations. Now, watching through the gap in the canvas, he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The highway itself seemed impossible. Yamamoto had studied engineering at Tokyo Imperial University before the military draft. He understood the technical challenges of carving a road along such terrain. The bridges alone, graceful concrete arches spanning coastal canyons, represented engineering achievements that would have taken years to complete. Yet the American guard, a corporal named Davies, who sat near the tailgate, had mentioned casually that the highway had been completed just 9 years earlier, during the depths of America's economic crisis. Yamamoto leaned toward Sergeant Hiroshi Nakamura, speaking quietly in Japanese. "Look at the bridges and the road surface, smooth concrete for kilometers. During our worst economic years, we could barely maintain existing infrastructure." Nakamura nodded slowly. He was older, 47, a career soldier who had fought in China before the Pacific operations. His face carried the weathered look of a man who had seen too much. "I have been thinking about the trucks we ride in," he replied. "Standard military transport, but comfortable. Good suspension. Well maintained. I counted 16 of them at the camp before we loaded. 16 trucks just to move 43 prisoners 300 kilometers south." In the truck behind them, Private Kenji Suzuki pressed his face close to the canvas opening. At 24, he was among the youngest of the group. He had been conscripted in 1943, captured during his first major operation. Everything about America confused him. The abundance, the casual waste, the friendliness of some guards contrasted with the propaganda he had absorbed during his brief military service. The convoy stopped for the first time near a small coastal town. Corporal Davies jumped down from the truck, then turned back. 15-minute break, you can stretch your legs, use the latrine. Stay within sight of the vehicles." The prisoners climbed out stiffly, surprised by the freedom. No shackles, no armed guards forming a perimeter with weapons ready. Just Davies and 3 other soldiers, smoking cigarettes and chatting casually while the Japanese men walked in small groups along the roadside. Yamamoto found himself standing near the edge of the overlook, staring at the Pacific Ocean. Davies approached, offering a cigarette. Yamamoto had learned that refusing small gestures seemed rude, so he accepted. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Davies said, gesturing at the coastline. "Joined the army to see the world. Ended up seeing more of California than anywhere else." Yamamoto struggled for words in English. "Very beautiful. In Japan also." "Ocean is beautiful," Davies nodded. "Been thinking about that. You guys probably miss home something fierce. Got families?" "Wife, 2 daughters, in Osaka." Yamamoto paused. "You?" "Engaged, girl in Sacramento, planning to get married next summer." Davies took a long drag on his cigarette. "War's over now, guess we all get to go home eventually." The simplicity of the statement struck Yamamoto. No triumph, no bitterness, just a statement of fact. The conflict had ended. People would return to their lives. He thought about what awaited him in Japan, a nation defeated, cities reduced to rubble by firebombing campaigns, an economy shattered. What would his daughters remember of their father? What kind of country would they inherit? The convoy continued south. As afternoon wore into evening, the landscape changed. They passed through agricultural valleys where vast fields stretched to the horizons. Yamamoto had read American agricultural statistics during his university studies, numbers that had seemed exaggerated, propaganda perhaps. Now he saw the reality. Endless orchards, irrigation systems spanning kilometers, mechanical harvesters sitting idle in fields already harvested. Nakamura voiced what several of them were thinking. One valley here produces more than 3 prefectures in Japan, and this is just one valley of many. That night they stopped at a military facility, not a prison camp but a regular army base. The prisoners were assigned to a barracks separate from the main compound, but again, the security seemed almost casual. Guards checked on them periodically, but the doors remained unlocked. The facility even had a small canteen, where, to their astonishment, they were allowed to purchase items with the small allowances prisoners received for camp labor. Private Suzuki bought a Coca-Cola, his first. The sweet, fizzy drink seemed to embody everything strange about America. Frivolous, excessive yet somehow appealing. He shared it with 2 other young soldiers, passing the bottle between them. "My uncle fought in China," one of them said quietly. "He told me stories about the Chinese prisoners, how we treated them." He paused, shame evident in his voice. "This is not what I expected." Suzuki had heard those stories too. Everyone had. The casual brutality, the contempt for captured enemies. He thought about the difference between what he had been taught, that surrender meant dishonor, that captivity was worse than death, and the reality of his experience. Clean barracks, adequate food, medical care when needed, and now this journey where guards offered cigarettes and made small talk about home. The second day brought them through areas more densely populated. They passed through towns where normal life continued. Children playing in schoolyards, people shopping in stores filled with goods, cars and trucks moving freely, despite gasoline rationing having only recently ended. The sheer normalcy of it struck many of the prisoners harder than anything else. Lieutenant Yamamoto watched a family picnicking near the roadside, the father tossing a baseball with 2 sons, while the mother unpacked food from a basket. He thought about his own daughters, wondered if they had enough to eat, if their school still stood, if the neighborhood had survived the firebombing of Osaka. The distance between that American family's peaceful afternoon and his daughter's reality seemed unbridgeable. Corporal Davies noticed Yamamoto's expression. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Yamamoto had learned this expression. "Thinking of family, of home." Davies nodded. "Yeah, must be tough. But hey, war's done. Occupation government is helping with reconstruction. Things will get better." "Maybe." Yamamoto paused, choosing words carefully. "Hard to imagine. My city. Very damaged. Many people dead. Economy." He struggled for the word. "Destroyed?" Davies offered. "Yes, destroyed." They drove through Santa Barbara as the sun set, the Spanish architecture glowing golden in the fading light. The city seemed untouched, peaceful, its beauty almost offensive in its completeness. Yamamoto thought about Tokyo, about Osaka, about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Not a single bomb had fallen on mainland American cities, not one. The asymmetry of the conflict's impact became painfully clear. That evening, at another way station, something unexpected happened. A young American lieutenant approached the prisoner group as they finished their meal. He introduced himself as Lieutenant Robert Chen, Chinese-American, assigned to oversee the final leg of their transport to California's Central Valley agricultural region. Chen spoke to them in halting Japanese, learned during military intelligence training. "Tomorrow, you reach your destination. I wanted to explain what awaits you. You will not be going to a traditional camp. The facility is a work program location. You will be housed in barracks on farming properties, working in agricultural operations. The war is over. The work is to help you sustain yourselves and to contribute to food production during the transition to peace." He paused, measuring his words carefully. "I know what many of you experienced before capture. I know what you were taught about surrender and captivity. I want you to understand. You will be treated according to international conventions. You will be paid for your work. You will have adequate food, shelter, and medical care. And when repatriation becomes possible, you will go home." The prisoners listened in silence. Private Suzuki raised his hand hesitantly. "May I ask question?" Chen nodded. "Of course. Why? Why treat us this way? We fought against you, killed American soldiers. Why kindness?" The question hung in the air. Chen considered it carefully before responding. "Because we are not defined by what our enemies do. We are defined by what we choose to do. You are human beings. The conflict has ended. Now we rebuild, both nations." Yamamoto listened to this exchange and felt something shift inside him. For months he had struggled with the dissonance between what he had been taught and what he had experienced. Japanese military culture had emphasized that Americans were weak, soft, corrupted by their wealth and individualism, that Americans would crumble under the discipline and sacrifice of Japanese forces. Yet here stood a nation that had fought across 2 oceans simultaneously, had produced ships and aircraft and weapons in quantities that seemed impossible, had developed atomic weapons and still chose to treat prisoners humanely. The third day brought them into the Central Valley. The agricultural abundance here exceeded anything they had seen along the coast. Vast fields of cotton, tomatoes, citrus groves stretching for kilometers. The irrigation systems alone represented engineering achievements equivalent to major infrastructure projects in Japan. And everywhere machines, tractors, harvesters, processing equipment, trucks hauling produce to markets and canneries. Sergeant Nakamura sat in stunned silence. He had fought in China, seen the industrial might that Japan had tried to project across Asia. He had believed the propaganda about American weakness, about the superiority of Japanese fighting spirit over American materialism. Now he understood the magnitude of the delusion. This single valley produced agricultural output that dwarfed entire regions of Japan, and it was just one valley among many in one state among 48. "We never had a chance," he said quietly to Yamamoto. "Did we?" Yamamoto shook his head. "No, I do not think so, but we could not see it. They showed us destroyed ships, told us we were winning. We believed because we wanted to believe." The convoy reached its destination in mid-afternoon, a large agricultural operation near Fresno. The facility manager, a civilian named Robert Patterson, met them as they arrived. Patterson was a veteran of the first global conflict, walked with a slight limp from an old injury. He gathered the prisoners in the yard and spoke through Lieutenant Chen as translator. "Gentlemen, welcome. I know this is not home, and I know you would rather be there. But while you are here, we will treat you fairly. You will work 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. You will receive the same pay as civilian agricultural workers, 75 cents per hour. 25 cents will go toward your board. The remainder is yours. You may purchase items from the camp canteen, save money for repatriation, send funds to families if that becomes possible. Your barracks are there." He pointed to newly constructed buildings. "Clean, heated, with proper sanitation facilities. Meals will be provided 3 times daily. Any questions?" Private Suzuki found himself raising his hand again. "We have freedom." Patterson smiled. "Within limits. The camp perimeter is marked. You can move freely within it. On Sundays you may have visitors if any come, though I doubt many will initially. You may write letters home when postal service to Japan resumes. You may practice your religion, maintain your cultural traditions within reason. You are prisoners of war, yes, but you are also human beings entitled to dignity." That evening, as the prisoners settled into their new barracks, Yamamoto found himself in conversation with several others. They gathered in small groups, processing what they had witnessed during the 3-day journey. One of the older men, a former schoolteacher named Tanaka, spoke thoughtfully. "I have been thinking about what we saw. The highways, the farms, the cities untouched by conflict, the casual abundance, the machines, the infrastructure. And I realize we were fighting a nation that was conducting this conflict with one hand while building highways and maintaining civilian prosperity with the other." Another prisoner added, "Do you remember how we were told that Americans were soft, that they loved comfort too much to endure sacrifice? But think about what we saw. They built those highways during economic depression. They maintained that agricultural system while sending millions of men to fight across 2 oceans. They treated us humanely while he paused, shame in his voice, while our forces committed atrocities against prisoners and civilians. Yamamoto listened to these conversations and thought about everything he had learned during his captivity. The numbers alone told a story. He had heard from guards that American factories had produced more than 300,000 aircraft during the conflict. 300,000. Japan had produced perhaps a tenth of that number. The Americans had launched dozens of aircraft carriers, while Japan struggled to replace the few that were lost. American submarine production had numbered in the hundreds, while Japan's numbered in the dozens. But beyond the numbers lay something more fundamental. The Americans had fought a war of terrible scale and still maintained the rule of law, still treated prisoners according to international conventions, still preserved their democratic institutions and civilian government. They had possessed the power to be ruthless and had chosen mostly not to be. The following weeks brought adjustment to new routines. The prisoners worked in the fields, harvesting late-season crops, maintaining equipment, preparing land for the next planting season. The work was hard but not cruel, the hours reasonable, the supervision firm but fair. Patterson proved to be a man of his word. Payment came as promised. The canteen stocked items at reasonable prices. When one prisoner fell ill with pneumonia, he received immediate medical care at a local hospital, the same treatment any civilian would receive. No one was beaten, no one was humiliated, no one was denied basic human dignity. Private Suzuki found himself working alongside Mexican-American laborers, young men who spoke some Spanish but mostly English. They treated the Japanese prisoners with cautious friendliness, sharing water during breaks, occasionally offering cigarettes or fruit from their lunch bags. One of them, a man named Garcia, spoke to Suzuki during a break. "You know, my cousin fought in Europe, got wounded in France, came home 3 months ago. He could hate you guys, hate all Japanese. But he told me something before I took this job. He said, they're just men who got caught up in something bigger than themselves, same as us." Suzuki struggled to respond in his limited English. "Your cousin, good man, wise man." Garcia nodded. "War makes men do things. Peace gives them the chance to be better. That is what my grandfather says." As winter progressed into early 1946, news began to filter in about Japan. The occupation government was working to stabilize the economy, rebuild infrastructure, establish democratic institutions. Food shipments were arriving to prevent starvation. War crimes trials were proceeding, but they focused on military and political leadership, not ordinary soldiers. There would be a path home eventually, once repatriation logistics could be arranged. Lieutenant Yamamoto received his first letter from home in February. His wife and daughters had survived. Their house had been destroyed in the firebombing, but they had found shelter with relatives in the countryside. They had enough to eat thanks to American food aid. His oldest daughter was attending a school reopened by the occupation authorities. They were alive, safe, managing. He sat on his bunk that evening, reading the letter for the 3rd time, and wept quietly. Sergeant Nakamura sat beside him, offering silent companionship. "I thought I would never see them again," Yamamoto said finally. "I thought they might be dead, or that I would die before repatriation. But there is hope now, real hope." Nakamura nodded. "We lost everything, our military, our empire, our pride. But perhaps we have gained something too, the chance to rebuild as something better." The months passed. Spring brought new planting, and the prisoners worked the fields alongside civilian laborers. They learned new agricultural techniques, operated machinery more advanced than anything common in rural Japan. Some began to imagine how such methods might be applied at home, how Japanese agriculture might be modernized. Lieutenant Chen visited periodically, checking on conditions, handling administrative matters. On one visit in April, he gathered a group of prisoners, including Yamamoto, Nakamura, and Suzuki. "I want to talk to you about something," Chen began. "You have been here 5 months now. The work reports I receive are excellent. You have integrated well, caused no problems, shown initiative and skill. But I wonder, what do you think about when you work? What do you feel about your situation?" The question invited honesty. After a long pause, Sergeant Nakamura spoke. "I think about my country, about what we did, what was done to us, and what comes next. I fought in China. I saw terrible things, did terrible things in the name of the emperor and the nation. I believed we were bringing civilization, creating a new order in Asia. Now I see that we brought only death and suffering." He paused, choosing words carefully. "Being here, seeing how you treat us, working alongside men who have every reason to hate us, it forces me to confront truths I avoided before." Yamamoto added, "I spent 4 years at university studying engineering. I learned about American industrial capacity, American innovation, but I still believed our spirit, our discipline, our willingness to die would overcome material disadvantage. The journey here, seeing your highways and farms and cities untouched by conflict, I understood finally. We were not fighting a war. We were fighting against the inevitable." Private Suzuki spoke last, his voice quiet. "I was taught that surrender was the ultimate shame, that captivity was worse than death, that Americans were devils who would torture and kill prisoners. None of it was true. I have been treated better here than in my own army. I have learned more about honor from my captors than from my commanders. It is confusing, painful, but also freeing, somehow." Chen listened carefully, then responded. "War is a terrible teacher, but sometimes the lessons are necessary. Japan chose a path of conquest and domination. You were caught up in that choice, some willingly, some not, but the conflict ended, and now both nations face different choices. America could have chosen revenge, brutality, domination. We chose something else, not from weakness, but from strength. Real strength." He stood to leave, then turned back. "When you go home, remember this. Remember that nations reveal themselves not in how they treat the powerful, but how they treat the powerless. Remember that victory without humanity is just another form of defeat. Remember that the future is not determined by the past, but by the choices we make going forward." The summer brought news of repatriation plans. Arrangements were being made to return prisoners to Japan in stages, beginning with the youngest and those with families. Private Suzuki would be among the first groups, likely departing in October. Lieutenant Yamamoto and Sergeant Nakamura would follow in later shipments. As the departure date approached, the prisoners found themselves experiencing complicated emotions. Relief at going home, certainly, but also unexpected sadness at leaving a place where, despite their status as prisoners, they had been treated with dignity, where they had worked alongside former enemies who had become, if not friends, at least fellow human beings. The evening before Suzuki's departure, the prisoners organized a small gathering. They shared food purchased from the canteen, told stories, sang songs from home. Patterson stopped by, offering handshakes and good wishes. "You have been good workers and good men," he told them through a translator. "I hope you find your country recovering, your families well. I hope you remember that Americans and Japanese are not destined to be enemies. We are just people, trying to build good lives for ourselves and our children." Private Suzuki bowed deeply, fighting tears. In halting English, he said, "Thank you for everything. I go home different man than I left. Better man, I hope." The next morning, Suzuki and 30 other young prisoners loaded onto trucks for the journey to the port. Lieutenant Yamamoto stood with others, watching them depart. He thought about his own journey south on the Pacific Coast Highway 9 months earlier. How silent they had been, uncertain and fearful. How different the return journey would be. When his own turn came in December 1946, Yamamoto found himself taking the same route north, retracing that original journey. But this time, he saw everything differently. The highway still impressed him, the farms still amazed him, but now he also saw the people. Americans going about their lives, building their futures, not dwelling on the conflict that had ended. At the port in San Francisco, as he prepared to board the ship that would take him home, Corporal Davies appeared. He had been reassigned to port security and recognized Yamamoto in the boarding line. "Lieutenant Yamamoto, heading home finally?" Yamamoto smiled. "Yes, finally." Davies extended his hand. "Good luck to you, to your family. Hope Japan gets back on its feet quickly." They shook hands, former enemies parting as something else. Not quite friends, but no longer adversaries. Just two men who had survived a terrible conflict and were returning to their lives. The ship journey took 2 weeks. Yamamoto spent much of it on deck, watching the Pacific roll by, thinking about everything that had happened since his capture. He had lost a war, lost years of his life, lost any illusions about Japanese military invincibility. But he had gained something too, a clearer understanding of what made nations strong, what constituted real honor, what kind of country he wanted to help build when he got home. Japan, when he arrived, shocked him. Tokyo had been devastated more completely than he had imagined. Rubble and reconstruction covered the landscape. Food remained scarce despite American aid. The economy barely functioned. But there was energy too, determination, a sense that the nation was rebuilding not just physically but philosophically. He found his family in the countryside where they had sheltered. His daughters barely remembered him, which hurt more than he had expected. But they were alive, healthy, beginning to thrive in schools reorganized along democratic lines. His wife had aged, hardship evident in new lines on her face, but her embrace felt like coming home to himself. In the years that followed, Yamamoto returned to engineering. He worked on reconstruction projects, applying techniques and knowledge gained during his captivity. He taught at a university, training a new generation of Japanese engineers. He spoke occasionally about his experiences as a prisoner, though not often. The lessons he had learned seemed too personal, too complex for easy summary. But he remembered. He remembered the journey down the Pacific Coast Highway, the agricultural valleys, the casual abundance of a nation that had fought a global conflict while maintaining prosperity. He remembered Corporal Davies offering a cigarette, Lieutenant Chen speaking about choices and humanity, Robert Patterson treating prisoners with dignity. He remembered realizing that his nation had lost not because of any lack of courage or sacrifice, but because it had misunderstood what made nations truly powerful. Sergeant Nakamura returned to his village and became a schoolteacher, trying to ensure the next generation understood the cost of military adventurism and the value of peace. Private Suzuki worked in a factory producing civilian goods, married, raised children in a Japan that chose democracy and pacifism over empire and militarism. They carried with them, these men and thousands like them, memories of a journey when they rode in silence, seeing an America they had been taught to despise and discovering a reality far more complicated and humbling. They had expected cruelty and found humanity. They had expected vengeance and found justice. They had expected contempt and found occasionally even kindness. The Pacific Coast Highway remained, that ribbon of concrete connecting San Francisco to Los Angeles. Thousands of cars traveled it daily, tourists and locals, none aware that in December 1945, trucks carrying Japanese prisoners had rolled south along that same route. None knowing that those prisoners had witnessed something that changed their understanding of war, victory, defeat, and what it meant to be human even in the aftermath of terrible conflict. The silence those men rode in was not the silence of submission or fear. It was the silence of men confronting truths that shattered everything they thought they knew. It was the silence of transformation, of old certainties dying and new understandings struggling to be born. It was the silence of witnessing strength that chose mercy, power that chose restraint, victory that chose to rebuild rather than destroy. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.